Hi guys. I wanted to talk to you about your paper and what I'm expecting from the paper when you have it finished and why we're doing it in small parts instead of one long paper that you normally probably do in a class. Okay, so when you have to do a paper for a class, typically you get sources and you write your paper, and it's kind of like maybe a persuasive, argumentative type paper that's um, stating a point, and you try to prove this point with the articles and the evidence that you have. So you've compiled this evidence and you're writing this paper, and that's what you're using. And then you basically talk about the articles, talk about your point, and you end with a conclusion. Now, that's not the type of paper that you're writing for this course. So this course is specifically an APA scientific type paper. You actually have research, so you want to mimic a similar style as the articles that you're used to reading. And I know you may not read all the way through the article, and that's okay. Um, at this level, really, sometimes it's really hard to understand like the statistics part and the really technical jargon that they use because you haven't had those courses, and I don't expect you to understand every single part of the article. Um, but the authors should be stating their points and talking about the evidence and talking about their methods and things such as that in a way that you at least somewhat understand. And the findings are typically what you'll be using as your evidence. So those should be more plainly stated. Even if, on my end, even if I'm reading this and I realize they're overstating their findings, that's not as big of a problem for you because at this level, you may not realize they're overstating the findings because you don't understand the statistics yet, and that's okay. So you just need to gather your articles and you need to compile this evidence to tell the story that you want to tell. So this is a paper that I'm actually working on. This was one of my first drafts of the paper. This is my title page. So this was a project that I have recently done. I have the title of my paper. I have the shortened title with running head on the first page, which this is your title page with the page number. Notice that on the second page, it no longer says running head. So I had to, when I go into the header footer, I had to make sure that I have different first page checked off here. All right. And also, this is something that a lot of people don't do, but you're supposed to. I don't really count as much off for it or anything, but if you notice between my paragraphs, there's no space. That's because I go into the line spacing options, and I had clicked this, so, but you click that after you highlight your whole paper, and it will do that to your whole paper to where it will take that little tiny extra space that sometimes shows up here. Let's see. Okay, so I restated my title here. I actually don't think that's supposed to be bold. I'm not as picky about little things like that. I actually kind of like the way it looks bold, but you can, I would leave it not bold for you guys. Okay, and so here the first introduction. So here's where I'm starting my actual like literature review section. So the introduction has to tell like the problem. So mine is about the impact of similarity on interest. So academic achievement is important, but there's also a goal to foster interest. Now, how can we do that? So these are things that's kind of bringing. It's not immediately stating this. It's not immediately talking about similarity and interest. It's just like thinking of ways that we can enhance interest, right? So you are basically introducing the problem, introducing something to your readers that makes it interesting at first, okay? And then, like at the end of my introduction here, I said a potential answer is that peers may impact one's interest more than dissimilar peers. It's similar peers may impact one's interest more than dissimilar peers, right? So that's kind of what that's like my thesis statement. This is what I'm setting out to prove in my paper. Okay, and then right now my actual introduction, it's going to be a lot longer than this, but this is like my first draft. So, but you guys, this is about what you guys will have. A couple of pages. So here's my first page, here's my second page, and then I talk about the current study. So I actually have basically 3 pages. But you guys, 2 to 3 pages is going to be adequate for this paper. Probably 2, just with 6 sources. 2 is probably enough. But if you have a longer story to tell, that's fine too. So I think maximum you should be extending this is 4 pages. But I wouldn't expect you to get much past 3 without being too, because you don't want to be too wordy. You want it to make sense. You want it to flow. You don't want to add a bunch of extra content. APA style papers are actually very dry, very boring. You can't talk about I and me and we, things like that, because you need to talk more in an academic language, like the researchers. Even though you are the researcher, and I know that seems odd, but that's just the way APA requires. You can't say, I decided to do this or that. Okay, so in your literature review, so after the intro paragraph / paragraphs, I use 2, but you'll probably only need 1. I start to talk about the actual research. Okay, so DC and Ryan, and I use DC and Ryan. I use DC and Ryan here. I also use them again in another sentence. And then I also bring in Baumeister and Leary, their need to belong, and I talk about that because I'm introducing these 2 constructs together, right? So talking about relatedness and similarity. Now, you can see that I'm not just talking about one study, and I'm not talking in depth about this study in this paragraph, talking about the sample size and everything else. That's fine to do when it makes sense and when it flows well, but you don't want it chopped up like this study said this study said that, this study said that. That's a little too choppy. You want it to flow. So these things related in the way I needed them to for this paragraph. So I can talk about them in the same paragraph, okay? Now, I move on, and I'm using headings here, so relatedness and similarity. And then I talk about it in a different way here, similarity and evaluation and decision making. So you guys might, if you have, let's say you're doing procrastination and stress. So you actually might have, if you want to, talk about procrastination separately about what it is and have a few citations there. Talk about stress separately and what it is and a few citations there. And then talk about how they relate. That would be fine too, and I would help you learn how to make those flow together. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that as I'm writing this, it's not all citations. So right here, there's not very many citations at all until we get to here. But then I have several together because this information I found in more than one source, and that's really good. And it's really good and important to incorporate sources together as you're writing. Okay, you don't want just one source, one source, one source. Same way here, I did it again. Now you guys only have 6 plus sources, so you can actually have more than 6 sources. You don't have to have the same sources you started with. If you find one isn't really flowing as much, you just need to have a final paper with 6 sources, and it needs to all flow together. Okay, so, but as I'm writing this, I get to the current study. And I say the current study seeks to examine and blah, blah, blah. So what am I looking for? So we had the following research question and hypothesis were examined. So I have my research question and I have my hypothesis. Research question 2, and this time I have 2 hypotheses based on this question. You guys are only going to have 1 question and 1 hypothesis. All right, so it might be, your question might be something like, does procrastination and stress have a relationship? And your hypothesis might be, the more people procrastinate, the more stressed out they get, or they are. Okay, and then your method section talks about you have a section for participants. So for me, I used 110 Mechanical Turk workers, and this was their mean age. This was their standard deviation of their age. They were paid 50 cents for their participation. You guys would say they received course credit. You can tell how many points if you want. That's up to you. And then, let's see. The resulting sample was primarily female. That's how mine was. So yours, I believe, was also primarily female. That's typically the pattern in research anywhere. And they had a bachelor's degree. Now you guys have, you have their age, you have how many participants, you have their gender, but you can also put about their class standing, because that's really relevant to you because you're college students. So a sample of 200 college students from Indiana University East were given course credit in their research methods class, etc. So that would be the participant section. And then the materials and measures. See, for me, I had several measures. You guys aren't going to have this many, but I had several for my specific study that I created. You guys are going to say something like, you might have here the survey. You could talk about there were so many questions in the survey, and there were these types of questions, and the questions that were used in the study, and you talk about your 2 questions. But you're welcome to put like the survey here, like survey or questionnaire, and then talk about them, and then you would put your specific measure. So let's say you're measuring procrastination. So procrastination would be here. And then you would talk about the question was asked, and you would say exactly what the question was. And you would talk about exactly how it was measured. Like I say, the need to belong scale is a 5-point scale. 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. And there were 10 items. But you guys are going to have a 1 question. So procrastination was a 1 question, or was a 1 item scale from 0 to 10 or whatever it was on the survey. But the person needs to know exactly how you measured this particular construct, which is procrastination. Okay, and then you might say stress, the same exact thing. You need to write exactly what the question was that was asked, word for word. This is something that you have to do word for word. And then you need to write exactly how it was measured. Okay? So that way somebody could replicate your study. That's a really important part of scientific research. Now, once you have the questions that you used, which goes down to procedure. Now, for me, my procedure was quite long compared to yours. And this looks pretty short, but it was actually pretty long. This is going to be pretty long compared to what you guys have to write. So, in mine, the participants first answered these questions, these types of questions. For you guys, you would just say participants were given the link to the survey to complete, and then you talk about they completed this 33 item questionnaire, and they completed the question. They first completed demographic questions, and then they completed questions about this, and this. But you don't have to list them out specifically, just kind of a general idea. And then you could say the data were compiled in an Excel spreadsheet, which was used for data analysis. And then that's really all that you need to put for procedure because you didn't have a very long procedure. Okay. Now, one thing I do want to point out, because you are, let's say, your graph. Let's say you have a graph that has the class standing. So you mentioned class standing in here. You need to refer to the graph. So I say participant information is included in table 1. So the person can go to table 1 and they can find participant characteristics, right? But you guys, that would be your graph for the class standing if that's the one you used. And now, once the procedure's done, that's where your results are. Now, since I had a couple of research questions, I kind of put my results in more of a organized fashion, but you guys won't need that. I mean, this will be the maximum you'll need because I did a Pearson correlation here. Pearson correlation was used to test the hypothesis that blah, blah, blah. And then I talk about this is one of the constructs. Here's the mean of the construct. Here's a standard deviation of the construct. And I talk about whether it was positively or negatively correlated, which it was positive. If it were negative, R would be negative right here. And then with this other construct, again, if you report a mean, which you need to for your constructs, you report a standard deviation. And that's only if your constructs are like on a scale, like 0 to 10, something like that. Not categorical like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, male, female, yes, no questions are categorical. So you wouldn't report means and standard deviations for those types of questions. So I hope that makes sense. Now, for your correlation, so this was small to moderate correlation. It's not very big. And then I have my p-value. So I want you to set your guys' p-value at 0.05. Okay, so if that wasn't evident in the videos that were already posted for this, then obviously I'll know, and I'm not going to take off a bunch of points for that, but just set it to 0.05, talk about it like it's statistically significant. So you'll need to talk about the magnitude, small to moderate, here, and it was statistically significant. And then I told what that meant. Those who perceived higher similarity rated their situational interest in the text as higher. So then I say, thus the hypothesis was supported. Okay, that's important. So they need not just the report of the statistics, but you need a very small, short explanation of what that means. Because sometimes people that don't understand the statistics still need to read it and understand what happened, right? So when you guys read something, you need to understand what actually happened. So then you talk about your discussion, and you talk about first you say whether your hypotheses were supported or not. And in your discussion, you are going to incorporate the research that you just had in the intro to, and you're going to talk about it in light of your results, this and this and this. So in the current study, this is this or that was that. But you talk about the previous research in light of your study. So your study aligned with these other studies, or it did not align with. Maybe you found the opposite of what you thought you would. So your hypothesis was not supported, and obviously more research needs done because these other people say it was, it should have been supported. So in your discussion, you also need to talk about limitations of your study. You can talk about how your study adds to the existing body of knowledge. That's always good to add. But see, my discussion, a lot of discussions are actually really long compared to the rest of the paper, which is kind of crazy, but you talk about your limitations. So a big limitation to this study that you guys have is that these are one-item scales. So you can't judge the reliability of anything. I mean, it's just one item. Like, how often does one item really measure the entire construct? You know, you learn a little bit about validity and reliability in this course. Like, how good could one item scale be? So that's one way, or one possible limitation you could add. And also, um, some of you might be using something like, say you're using how satisfied people are with their GPA, and you're calling that GPA. Well, some people may be perfectly satisfied with their GPA at a C, where others may have a higher GPA but not quite be as satisfied. So you a limitation could be, is this really a measure of GPA, or maybe there could have been a better measure, and then you can mention what that is. So basically, you just need to talk about your limitations, future direction. So future direction could investigate this similarly, but make sure that the GPA question is more direct about measuring the GPA. So I hope that is helpful for you guys. Then you have your references and your tables and figures, and then that's it. Like, I have an appendix here. You guys won't need an appendix, but your paper shouldn't be, it's not going to be this long. It's not going to be excessively long, but I hope that this has clarified some information for the paper. I wasn't sure if, I had several questions, so I want to make sure that that's clear about kind of the expectations of this type of paper, because maybe you guys haven't even written a paper like this or thought about this. But if you have questions, please let me know. I would be happy to answer them. All right, talk to you later.